Hello again, my friends. I thought I would come back and tell you a new story. Hopefully everything is going well with all of you. I understand the current times can be trying. But as the current times are trying, I have chosen to come and tell you a trying tale. My story today is The Dragon of the North. Now, as usual, I'll be using the version that was written down by Andrew Lang, as that is the most concise and my favorite version. Now, let us begin. Very long ago, as the oldest people I know have told me, there once lived a terrible monster, who came out of the north and laid waste to whole tracts of the country, devouring both men and beasts. And this monster was so destructive that it was feared that unless help came, no living creature would be left on the face of the earth. Because we don't understand it, therefore it must be after everyone. But it had a body like an ox and legs like a frog, with 2 short forelegs and 2 long ones behind. And besides that, it had a tail like a serpent, 10 fathoms long. Wow. And when it moved, it jumped like a frog. With every spring, it covered half a mile of ground. Fortunately, as was its habit, it would remain for several years in the same place and not move till the whole of the neighborhood was eaten up. Nothing could hunt it, because its body was covered in scales, which were harder than stone or metal. Its 2 great eyes shone by night and even by day, like the brightest lamps. And anyone who had the ill luck to look into those eyes became, as it were, enchanted, and was obliged to rush of his own accord directly into the monster's jaws. So, apparently they're like cultists or something. In this way, the dragon was able to feed upon both men and beasts with the least bit of trouble to itself, as it needed to move not 1 inch from the very spot it lay. All the neighboring kings had offered rich rewards to anyone who should be able to destroy the monster, either by force or by magic, and many had tried their luck, and every one of them had failed. Once the great forest in which the dragon had lay had been set on fire. The forest burned down. The fire didn't hurt the dragon one little bit. However, there was a tradition amongst the wise men of the country that the dragon might be overcome by someone who possessed the ring of King Solomon, on which secret writing was engraved. This inscription would enable anyone who was wise enough to interpret it to find out how the dragon could be destroyed. Only no one knew where the ring was hidden, nor was there any sorcerer or learned man to be found who would be able to explain the inscription. Because, MacGuffin. That's called a MacGuffin, boys and girls. But at last there came a young man with a good heart and plenty of courage, who set out in search for the ring. He took his way towards the sunrise, because he knew that all wisdom of old times comes from the East, because stereotypes. And after some years, he met with a famous Eastern magician. By the way, the dragon's been running around this entire time, and asked for his advice in that matter. The magician answered, "Mortal men have but little wisdom, and can give you no help, but the birds of the air would be better guides to you if you could learn their language. I can help you understand that if you will stay with me a few days." The youth accepted the magician's offer, and said, "I cannot now offer you any reward for your kindness, but should my undertaking succeed, your trouble shall be repaid." Because people's words were worth something. Then the magician brewed him a powerful potion out of 9 kinds of herbs, which he had gathered by himself all alone by moonlight. And he gave the youth 9 spoonfuls of it daily for 3 days. And at the end of this time, he could understand the language of birds, or he was high as a kite. I'll let you know which one was more likely. At parting, the magician said to him, "If you do ever find Solomon's ring and get possession of it, then come back to me, and that I may explain the inscription of the ring to you, for there is no one else in the world who can do this. And I know that because reasons." From that time, the youth never felt lonely as he went along. He always had company, because he could understand the birds. And in this way, he learned many things which mere human knowledge could never have taught him. But as time went on, and the dragon continued to rampage all over the bloody place, he heard nothing about the ring. It happened that one evening, when he was hot and tired with walking, he sat down under a tree in the forest to eat his supper, and he saw 2 gaily plumed birds that were strange to him, sitting on top of a tree, talking to one another about him. The first bird said, "I know that the wandering fool under that tree there. He has come so far without finding what he seeks. He's trying to find King Solomon's lost ring." The other bird said, "Well, he'll have to seek help from the witches, who will doubtless be able to put him on the right track. If she has not got the ring herself, she knows where to get it. "But where is he to find the witch?" said the first. "She has no settled dwelling, but is here today and gone tomorrow. He might as well try to catch the wind." The other bird replied, "I don't know, certainly, where she is present, but in 3 nights from now she will come to the spring to wash her face, as she does every month when the moon is full, in order that she may never grow old or wrinkled, but always keep about her the bloom of youth." "Well," said the first bird, "that spring's not far from here. Shall we go and see how she does it?" "Willingly, if you like," said the other bird. "'Cause gossip." The youth immediately resolved to follow those birds to the spring. Only 2 things made him uneasy. First, lest he might be asleep when the birds went. Secondly, that lest he might lose sight of them, since he had not wings to carry him along so swiftly. He was too tired to keep awake all night, yet his anxiety prevented him from sleeping soundly. And when with the earliest dawn he looked up at the treetop, he was glad to see his feathered companions were still asleep, with their heads tucked under their wings. He ate his breakfast, and he waited until the birds should start, but they did not leave their place all day. They hopped from one tree to another looking for food all day long until the evening, when they went back to their old perch to sleep. The next day the same thing happened, but on the 3rd morning one bird said to the other, "Today we must go to the spring to see the witch maiden wash her face." They remained on that tree until noon, and then they flew away towards the south. The young man's heart beat with anxiety lest he should lose sight of them, but he managed to keep them in view until they perched again on another tree. He ran after them until he was quite exhausted and out of breath, and after 3 short rests, the birds at length reached a small open space in the forest, on the edge of which they placed themselves at the top of a high tree. When the youth had overtaken them, he saw that there was a clear spring in the middle of this space. He sat down at the foot of the tree upon which the birds were perched, and listened attentively to what they were saying, because eavesdropping is the best way to learn anything according to some people. "The sun is not down yet," said the first bird. "We must wait a while until the moon rises and the maiden comes to the spring. Do you think she will see the young man sitting under a tree?" "Nothing is likely to escape her eyes, certainly not a young man," said the other bird. "Will that youth at least have the sense to not let himself be caught in her toils?" "We'll wait," said the first bird, "and see how they get on." The evening light had faded, and the full moon was already shining down the far end of the forest when the young man heard a slight rustling sound. After a few moments there came out of the forest a maiden, gliding over the grass so lightly her feet seemed to scarcely touch the ground, and she stood beside the spring. The youth could not turn his eyes away from the maiden, for he had never in his life seen a woman so beautiful. Without seeming to notice anything, she went to the spring, looked up at the full moon, and then knelt down and bathed her face 9 times, then looked at the moon again, walked 9 times around the well, and she sang this song. "Full-faced moon with light unshaded, let my beauty never be faded, never let my cheek grow pale. While the moon is waning nightly, may the maiden bloom more brightly, may her freshness never fail." And then she dried her face with her long hair, and was about to go away when her eye suddenly fell upon the spot where the young man was sitting. She turned towards the tree. The youth rose up and stood waiting, and then the maiden said, "You ought to have a heavy punishment because you have presumed to watch my secret doings in the moonlight. But I will forgive you this one time because you are a stranger and knew no better. But you must tell me truly who you are and how you came to this place where no mortal has ever set foot before." The youth answered humbly, "Forgive me, beautiful maiden, if I have unintentionally offended you. I chanced to come here after long wandering, and found a good place to sleep under this tree. At your coming I did not know what to do, but stayed where I was, because I thought my silent watching could not offend." The maiden answered kindly, "Come and spend this night with us. You will sleep better on a pillow than on damp moss." The youth hesitated a little, but presently heard the bird saying at the top of the tree, "Go where she calls you, but take care to give no blood, or you will sell your soul." So the youth went with her, and soon they reached a beautiful garden where stood a splendid house, which glittered in the moonlight as it was built out of gold and silver, because that's great stuff to build houses out of, don't you know it? When the youth entered, he found many splendid chambers, each one finer than the last. Hundreds of tapers burnt upon golden candlesticks, and shed a light like the brightest day. At length they reached a chamber where a table was spread with the most costly of foods, At the table were placed 2 chairs, one of silver, the other gold. The maiden seated herself upon that golden chair, and offered the silver chair to her companion. And they were served by maidens dressed in white, whose feet made no sound as they moved about, and not a word was spoken during the meal. Afterwards, the youth and the witch maiden conversed pleasantly, until a woman dressed in red came to remind them that it was bedtime. The youth was now shown to another room containing a silken bed with down cushions, where he slept delightfully, yet he seemed to hear a voice near his bed which repeated to him, "Remember, give no blood." The next morning the maiden asked whether or not he would like to stay with her always in this beautiful place, and as he did not answer immediately, she continued, "You see how I always remain young and beautiful. I am under no one's orders, and can do just as I like, so that I never have thought of marrying before. But from the moment I saw you, I took a fancy to you. So if you agree, we could be married, and might live together like royalty, because I have great riches." The youth could not be but tempted by her offer, until he remembered how the birds called her the witch, and her warning sounded always in her ears. Therefore he answered carefully, "Do not be angry with me, if I do not decide immediately on this important matter. Give me a few days to consider before we come to an understanding." "Why not?" she answered. "Take some weeks to consider if you like, and take counsel with your own heart." And to make the time pass pleasantly, she took him over every part of her beautiful dwelling, and showed him all of her splendid treasures. But these treasures were all produced by enchantment, for she could make anything she wished appear by the help of King Solomon's signet ring. Only none of these things remained fixed. They all passed away like the wind, leaving nothing but a trace behind. But the young man did not know this. At this time he thought they were all real. One day the maiden took him to a secret chamber where there was a little gold box standing on a silver table. Pointing at that box, she said, "Here is my greatest treasure, whose like is not to be found in the whole of the world. It is a precious ring, and if you marry me, I will give you this ring as a marriage gift, and it will make you the happiest of mortal men. But in order that our love may last forever, you must give me for that ring 3 drops of blood from the little finger of your left hand." When the youth heard these words, a cold shudder ran over him, for he remembered that his soul was at stake. He was cunning, though. However, to conceal his feelings, and make no direct answer, he only asked the maiden, as if carelessly, what was so remarkable about that ring. Because, he's been here a while, and naivety is apparently a thing. She answered, "No mortal is able to entirely understand the power of this ring, because no one thoroughly understands the secret signs. But with even my half-knowledge, I can work wonders. If I put the ring on the little finger of my left hand, then I can fly like a bird through the air wherever I wish to go. If I put it on the 3rd finger of my left hand, I am invisible, and I can see everything that passes around me, though none can see me. If I put it on the middle finger of my left hand, then neither fire nor water nor any sharp weapon shall ever hurt me. If I put it on my forefinger of my left hand, with its help I can produce whatever I wish. I can in a single moment build houses or anything I desire. And finally, as long as I wear the ring on the thumb of my left hand, so that hand is so strong it can break down rocks and walls. Besides these, the ring has other secrets, which, as I said, no one can understand. No doubt it contains things of great importance." The ring formerly belonged to a king named Solomon, who is said to be the wisest of kings, during whose reign the wisest men lived. It is not known whether this ring was ever made by mortal hands. It is supposed that the king got it by magic. When the youth heard all this, he was determined to try and get possession of the ring, though he did not completely believe all its wondrous gifts. He wished the maiden would let him have it in his hands, but he did not quite like to ask her to do so. After a while, she put it back in the box. A few days later, they were again speaking of the ring, and the youth said, "I do not think it possible that the ring can have all the power you say." The maiden opened the box and took the ring out, and it glittered as she held it like the clearest sunbeam. She put it on the middle finger of her left hand, and told the youth to take a knife and try as hard as he could to cut her, for he would not be able to hurt her. He was unwilling, but she insisted, and he tried at first only in play, and seriously, but an invisible wall of iron seemed to be between them, and the maiden stood before him laughing and unhurt. When she put the ring on her 3rd finger, in an instant she had vanished. Presently she was beside him, and laughing. "Do let me try," said the youth, "whether I can do these wonderful things." The maiden, suspecting no treachery, gave him the ring. The youth pretended to have forgotten what to do, and asked which finger he must put the ring on so no sharp weapon could hurt him. "The middle finger of your left hand," she answered, laughing. She then took the knife and tried to strike him. He even tried to cut himself. He found it was impossible. Then he asked the maiden to show him how to split stones and rocks. She led him to a courtyard where a great boulder stood. Now she said, "Put the ring on the thumb of your left hand, and you will see how strong that hand has become." The youth did so. Found to his astonishment, with a single blow of his fist, the stone flew into 1,000 pieces. And then he bethought him that he does not use his luck when he has it as a fool, and this was his chance which when lost never return. So while they stood laughing, he placed the ring, as if in play, on the third finger of his left hand. "Now you are invisible to me until you take the ring off again." But he had no mind to do that. On the contrary, he went further off, and then put the finger on the little finger of his left hand, and soared in the air like a bird. When the maiden saw him flying away, she thought at first he was still playing, and cried, "Come back, friend, for now you have seen what I have told you the truth." But he did not return, and the maiden saw she was deceived, and bitterly repented that she had ever trusted him with the ring. Because even heroes can be liars, and honesty is a fool's tool, but one that you should always use, because in the end, the truth will always out. But returning to our young man, he never halted in his flight until he reached the dwelling of the wise magician who had taught him the speech of the birds. The magician was delighted to find that his search had been successful, and at once set to work to interpret the secret signs engraved upon the ring. But it took him 7 weeks to make them out clearly. And by the way, I'd like to remind you, there's still a dragon running around. Then he gave the youth the following instructions on how to overcome the dragon. You must have an iron horse cast, which must have a little wheel under each foot. You must be armed with a spear 2 fathoms long, which you will be able to wield by means of the magic ring upon your left thumb. The spear must be as thick in the middle as a large tree, and both its ends must be sharp. In the middle of the spear you must have 2 strong chains, 10 fathoms long. And as soon as the dragon has made himself fast to the spear, which you must thrust through his jaws, you must spring quickly from the iron horse and fasten the ends of the chain firmly to the ground with iron stakes, so that he cannot get away. After 2 or 3 days, his strength will be so far exhausted that you will be able to come near him. Then you must put the ring on your left thumb and give him the finishing stroke. But keep the ring on your third finger until you have come close to him, so the monster cannot see you, else he might strike you dead with his tail. When all is done, take care you do not lose the ring, and no one takes it from you by cunning. The young man thanked the magician for his directions, and promised, should they succeed, to reward him. But the magician answered, "I have profited so much by the wisdom the ring has taught me, I desire no other reward." They then parted. The youth quickly flew home through the air. After remaining in his own home for some weeks, because he just kind of showed up out of nowhere, and everybody was fine with that for some reason, he heard people say that the terrible dragon of the north was not far off, and might shortly be expected in the country. The king announced publicly that he would give his daughter in marriage, as well as a large part of his kingdom, to whosoever would free the country from that dragon. The youth then went to the king and told him he had good hopes of subduing the dragon, if the king would grant him all he desired for the purpose. The king willingly agreed, and the iron horse, the great spear, and the chains were all prepared as requested. When all was ready, it was found the iron horse was so heavy that 100 men could not move it from the spot. So the youth found that there was nothing for him to do but move it by his own strength through the means of the magic ring. The dragon was now so near that in a couple of springs he would be over the frontier. The youth now had to consider how he should act, for if he pushed the iron horse from behind, he would not be able to ride on it as the sorcerer said he must. But a raven unexpectedly spoke to him, giving him advice. Ride upon the horse and push the spear against the ground as though you were pushing off a boat from the land. The youth did so, because birds are very smart, and found that in this way he could easily move forward. The dragon had his monstrous jaws wide open, all ready for his prey. A few paces nearer, and the man and horse would have been swallowed up. The youth trembled with horror, and his blood ran cold, but he did not lose his courage, and holding the iron spear upright in his hand, he brought it down with all his might, right through the monster's lower jaw. And quick as lightning, he sprang from his horse before the dragon had time to shut his mouth. A fearful clap like thunder, which could be heard for miles around, now warned him the dragon's claws had closed upon the spear. When the youth turned round, he saw the point of the spear sticking up high above the dragon's upper jaw, and knew the other end must be fastened firmly to the ground. The dragon had got his teeth fixed on the iron horse, which was now useless. The youth now hastened to fasten down the chains to the ground by means of the enormous pegs which he had provided. The death struggle of that monster lasted 3 days and 3 nights. In his writhing, he beat his tail so violently against the ground that at 10 miles distance the earth trembled as though it were an earthquake. When at length he lost his power to move his tail, the youth, with the help of the ring, took up a stone which 20 ordinary men could not have moved, and beat the dragon so hard about the head with it that very soon the monster lay lifeless before him. Convenient, that. You can fancy how great the rejoicing was when the news spread abroad that the terrible monster was dead. His conqueror was received in the city with as much pomp as if he had been the mightiest of kings. And the old king did not need to urge his daughter to marry the slayer of the dragon. He found her already willing to bestow his hand upon this hero who had done all alone what whole armies had tried in vain to do. Because fame is everything. In a few days, a magnificent wedding was celebrated, at which the rejoicing lasted 4 whole weeks, for all the neighboring kings had met together to thank this man who had freed their world from their common enemy. But everyone forgot amid the general joy that they ought to have buried the dragon's body, for now it began to have such a bad smell that no one could live in the neighborhood, and before long the whole air was poisoned. Pestilence broke out, which destroyed many hundreds of people. In this distress, the king's son-in-law resolved to seek help once more from the magician, to whom he had traveled through the air by help of the ring, which he did so quickly. But there's a proverb which says, ill-gotten games never prosper, and the prince found that the stolen ring brought him ill luck after all. The witch maiden had never rested night nor day until she found out where that ring was, and as soon as she had discovered by means of magical arts that the prince in the form of a bird was on his way to the Eastern magician, she changed herself into an eagle, and watched in the air until the bird she was waiting for came into sight. She knew him at once for the ring which was somehow hung around his neck by a ribbon. I thought it was on his finger. Strange that. Then the eagle pounced upon the bird, and the moment she seized him, her talons, she tore the ring from his neck, and before the man in bird shape had time to prevent her. Then the eagle flew down to the earth with her prey, and the two stood face to face. Now, villain, you are in my power, cried the maiden. I favored you with my love, and you repaid me with treachery and theft. You stole my most precious jewel, and you expect to live happily as the king's son-in-law? No, now the tables are turned. You are in my power, and I will be revenged upon you. Forgive me, cried the prince. I know too well how deeply I have wronged you, and most heartily do I repent it. The maiden answered, your prayers and repentance come too late, and if I spare you, everyone will think me a fool. You have doubly wronged me. First you scorned my love, and then you stole my ring, and you must now bear punishment. With these words, she put the ring upon her left thumb, lifted the young man with one hand, and walked away with him under her arm. This time she did not take him to a splendid palace, but to a deep cave in a rock where there were chains hanging from the wall. She now chained his hands and feet so that he could not escape, and she said in an angry voice, here you will remain chained until you die. I will bring you every day enough food to prevent you from starving, but you need never hope for freedom any more. And with that she left him, because you have to pay for your crimes sometimes, no matter what the reason you committed them was. The old king and his daughter waited anxiously for many weeks for the prince to return, but no news of him arrived. The king's daughter often dreamed that her husband was going through some great suffering, and therefore she begged her father to summon all the enchanters and magicians that they might find where he was, and how he could be set free. But the magicians, with all their arts, could find nothing except that he was still alive and undergoing great suffering, but no one could tell where he was to be found. At last a celebrated wizard from Finland was brought before the king. He had found out the king's son-in-law was imprisoned in the east, not by men, but by something more powerful. The king now sent messengers to the east to look for his son, and they by good luck met with the old magician who he had spoken with originally, who had interpreted the signs in the ring, and thus was possessed of more wisdom than anyone else in the world. That magician soon found out what he wished to know, and pointed to the place where the prince was imprisoned, but said, he is kept there by enchantment, and cannot be set free without my help. I will therefore go myself. So they all set out, guided by birds. After some days they came to the cave where the unfortunate prince had been chained up for nearly 7 years by this time. He recognized the magician immediately, but the old man did not know him, he had grown so thin. However, he undid the chains by the help of magic, and took care of the prince until he recovered and became strong enough to travel. When he finally reached home, he found the old king had died that very morning, and now he was raised to the throne. And now, after his long suffering, came prosperity, which lasted to the end of his life. But he never got back that magic ring, nor has it ever again been seen. Now, if you'd been the prince, would you not have really, or rather, stayed with the maiden you loved? It's an interesting question. You know, was it worth it to steal the ring by force? I don't think so. But I'm not a prince who has to fight a dragon. Hope you enjoyed my story this week. I'll try and be back next week to tell another. Take care of yourselves.